Someone has been downvoting all of my Gary Lewis and the Playboys reviews. They must think I'm some kind of clown or something. But to that person I say, everybody loves a clown, so why don't you? Everybody laughs at the things that I say and do. But you don't laugh when you see me coming. No, you don't laugh, you just go home running. Everybody loves a clown, so why don't you? Because a clown has feelings too. And that brings us to Gary Lewis and the Playboys' third LP and their final one for 1965, a little album called Everybody Loves a Clown. So the title song, Everybody Loves a Clown, is very well remembered, one of their signature tunes, and we'll get to that, of course, in just a moment. Of the three 1965 albums, this Diamond Ring, A Session with Gary Lewis, and this one, this was the lowest charting of the three by a fairly wide margin, peaking about number 44. That's still good enough, though, that they'll continue making LPs for several years. Indeed, we'll start it on 1966 here pretty soon. The lead song, Everybody Loves a Clown, that was the main single, peaked at number 4. That was currently the lowest charting single the group had, with the exception of the promotional single, Doin' the Flake, 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 do the flake, do the flake, flake, which that really doesn't count as it was a promo for Kellogg's, and you can find that on many of their compilations and collections and whatnot. But again, the LP, while it had a significant drop in chart positions, the single only dropped a little bit. We're still talking top 5, which for your first few singles as a group, pretty darn successful. Remember, of course, Liberty Records' policy was to have a very strong, heavily promoted A-side, and the B-side was just kind of a free ride, as put in the liner notes for their singles collection CD. So let's get in and talk a little bit more about this album. Now, you might notice something about the photos on this album, both on the front and on the back. There are no Playboys pictured on this record. Previous albums had photos of the group, often with Gary. You might remember that throughout even the group's beginning in 1965, there were quite a few personnel changes going on. People joining the group and then leaving almost immediately after. A lot of instruments kind of changing hands. I don't doubt all of those personnel change-ups had something to do with there being no supporting musicians pictured. Additionally, some Gary Lewis recordings used the Wrecking Crew and other session musicians, so you have to keep that one in mind too. But very interesting to think that there are no Playboys pictured. It's only Gary Lewis. The other interesting thing is sort of the liner notes for the record. You might remember this Diamond Ring relied very heavily on the Jerry Lewis name. It was promoting him. Hey, you know Jerry Lewis from TV? Well, here's his son. A Session with Gary Lewis had focused mostly on their film and TV appearances or interactions with that community, like, hey, if you turn on TV, you might see them on such and such show. This one does something totally different again. We get this right up from Jerry and Patty Lewis, so Gary's mom and dad, all about their pride in the group and whatnot, and how it's so fun to come home and have all these young, talented, handsome men practicing instruments in their front room, but boy does it get loud sometimes. And it's a very innocuous writing, and I don't really know that it does a lot to promote the group, but it was nice of Jerry and Patty, I guess, to write that in. Interestingly, no input from Leon Russell or Snuff Garrett or other people who were involved in the production of the album. It's kind of strictly from the outside looking in, I guess. But this album, apparently, according to the CD notes, was intended by Gary as something of a tribute to his dad. And apparently this cover image of Gary in sad clown makeup was started because he looked at photos, publicity photos his dad had done for Paramount Pictures, and then called Paramount and said, I'd like to do those photos, same angle, same makeup, all that jazz, and that's precisely what he did, and that gave us this iconic cover image for Everybody Loves a Clown. So he intended this record, I think, to sort of make his father proud and show that he could kind of follow in his father's footsteps a little bit and had great respect for him and his work. And this album does feel fairly cohesive. We have a lot of buoyant, fun, entertaining songs, still mostly covers, and we'll see a few kind of common parallels between songs they'd previously covered and ones that had been released for the first time in November of 1965 on this record. So let's actually go ahead I'll show you side one real quick. We start off with the title song, of course, Everybody Loves a Clown, tribute to Jerry Lewis from his son Gary. You know, it's catchy and buoyant and circusy, but it's never obnoxious. It's never grating, that kind of thing. And I like that. I appreciate that in the song, you know. You might be the person who plays the fool, but deep down you're really lonely, that kind of thing. It has a nice emotional chord, and I think Gary Lewis strikes it well. He was definitely the right person to sing this song. It's been covered a few times. Jan and Dean covered it. It's used in one of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episodes. Gary Lewis gets a co-writing credit, along with Snuff Garrett and Leon Russell, producer and arranger respectively. So we're starting off strong, top 4 single. You know, a lot we can do with that. We have next up Mr. Blue. This was a hit for the Fleetwoods in the late 1950s there. The Fleetwoods, of course, a male singer with 2 female backing vocalists. Here we have an all-male version. The Fleetwoods did a really nice job on it. Here, Gary Lewis and his team, they kind of sweeten it up a little bit, and it's a little more upbeat, a little less dramatic and whatnot. Dwayne Blackwell famously wrote the lyrics to it, and Mr. Blue is a very beautiful song. It has a little bit of that 50s stuff kind of as a holdover still, but for the most part, it's one I think that's geared more at kids, you know, of the 60s. You know, they want something, they wouldn't want those really dramatic pauses and the deep vocals. They want something a little more upbeat and fun. And it's a good start, and I think it's a nice cover overall. Then we have a cover of Gene McDaniel's Chip Chip. And this is a weird song, tearing down the mansion of love that someone else has built without you, that kind of thing. Kind of an odd song. Gene McDaniels had a big hit with it. The weird thing I find is how he enunciates his vocals so well when he sings, you know, that you cheat a little bit. And Gary Lewis copies that perfect diction, that kind of flawless enunciation here for his cover. So you could definitely tell they listened to Gene McDaniels' original and then said, okay, we need to do the same thing, even down to those weird vocals. My favorite thing about his version, I like the sound effect of kind of like the hammer striking more in his version than Gene McDaniel's original. You know, as it's about ripping down a metaphorical house, I guess you should have the best possible demolition sound effect imaginable, and I like the version that he does a little bit better. But overall, his version isn't quite as strong vocally as Gene McDaniel's original is, and it's such a bizarre song, it's certainly not going to resonate with everybody. We have an original, at least I believe it's an original. I couldn't find a version that predated theirs. I Gotta Find Cupid. This was written by the team of Boyce and Hart, along with input from Snuff Garrett and Leon Russell. It's been covered many times, and I would argue a lot of the covers are better. Let's see, The Outcast did a version, and it's really good, not too long afterwards there. It's an upbeat tune. It kind of starts with this faux tragic vibe, but then it jumps into something a lot more fun, you know, I gotta find Cupid. And it's a good song for them to do, and it fits really well with Everybody Loves a Clown, I think, as well. So this album feels, as I said before, a little more cohesive than their previous ones did. A lot of these songs feel like they were picked because they kind of have that same serio-comic vibe than they do, or I should say than others do, on some of their other sets, where they just copied covers very closely, whatever they could do, that kind of thing. Follow that up with a song that's almost an original, Let Me Tell Your Fortune. This was written by Cliff Crawford. He had written The Best Man Wins on the first record they did, This Diamond Ring. And he had done a demo version of this song about having your fortune told, falling in love, that kind of thing, back in the 50s. As far as I know, it didn't really do anything, and Crawford's more remembered as a songwriter than he is as a performer. At least that's how I always think of him. So this was almost an original. It was a song that people really wouldn't have known, and they do a nice job, I think. Again, they take the 50s original arrangement and make it more upbeat and more poppy, kind of, for the 1960s, and I like that. And I think Gary Lewis has a really good voice for this song, too. Again, we have kind of a carnival, clownish atmosphere to it, but it's not like a grating, obnoxious song. We will get there, though. But, you know, I like this one. I think it suits the album it's on really well. Let Me Tell Your Fortune. That's a pretty fun one. Alrighty, and then we have one more on side one. A little number called Till I Kissed You. You might remember on their last record, they had a cover of a little song called Walk Right Back, and that was done by a duo known as the Everly Brothers, who are still much beloved today and influenced generations of musicians. So we have another Everly Brothers cover, Ooh, Till I Kissed Her, that kind of thing. So Till I Kissed You, it's a pretty close copy, honestly. The only major difference Gary Lewis and the Playboys did was they kind of sped it up a little bit, but for the most part, it follows the Everly Brothers version pretty much point for point. They don't do too much with the song. They'd done a little bit more with Walk Right Back previously. They kind of made it a little bit more rowdy, but here it's as close to the Everly Brothers as they can get. Not bad, but they don't do much with it. We flip the record over to have Tossin' and Turnin', a Bobby Lewis song dating back to 1961. Again, almost a point-for-point remake, as close as they can possibly get. Gary Lewis doesn't quite have the frenetic energy that Bobby Lewis did. They're not related, at least not as far as I know. But it's, again, kind of, I wish they'd taken something else and put their own spin on it a little bit. They don't do the kind of intro part that's on most Bobby Lewis recordings of the song. They take that off. They just stick to like the song itself. Now we have a real 1950s throwback, a song that's, as far as I'm concerned, is burned in the 1950s in my brain. You are my special angel. Bobby Helms, of course, probably did the most famous version, but there are lots of covers of that. And Gary Lewis's version is a lot less kind of soppy and syrupy than Bobby Helms' version is. Minimal backing vocals. We don't have the angelic choirs that Bobby Helms did to back him up. And he doesn't drag things out quite as much as Bobby Helms and company do too. It's done in much more of a then modern, poppy vibe. Kind of a one that I think teenagers would appreciate more than, Bobby Helms doing all that sort of stuff. It's a nice cover, kind of unusual, I think, to choose something that's so rooted in the 50s, but they do a nice job on it. And then we come to, I think, the weirdest one on the record, called We'll Work It Out. Not We Can Work It Out, that's a totally different song. We'll Work It Out. And the only real info I could find about this song was that it was apparently done originally by a group called Henrietta and the Hairdos, sometimes known just as Henrietta. And they released it on a 45 and it didn't really seem to do anything, and that was basically the end of it. I couldn't find any other versions of this song. I could find songs with the same or similar names, but they were different, recordings, completely different songs. I don't really know what the story is with this, but I wasn't too impressed. This is probably my least favorite track on here. We'll Work It Out just kind of exists. It doesn't really do anything too crazy. Gary Lewis isn't called upon to do anything that's going to wow the audience, and it feels just like a very generic filler track. I'm not too impressed by it. However, a filler track that is a very popular cover that many people will recognize is next up, Sha-La-La. Sha-La-La was originally done by the Shirelles, but of course the most famous version today is by Manfred Mann. Like My Special Angel, there are tons of covers of this song. It's very iconic. I don't doubt this was picked just because it was popular and it's something they knew they could do. Their version copies Manfred Mann's almost exactly. You can tell that's the one they looked at more so than the Shirelles version. And it feels a lot to have yet another kind of facsimile cover song. It feels a lot like filler here, but they do a nice job, and it does fit with kind of the bouncy, buoyant vibe of the LP, being fun but not to the point where it gets obnoxious. And that leads us to the most obnoxious song on the album, an original, and the B-side to Everybody Loves a Clown, a little number called Time Stands Still. Time Stands Still starts very dramatically. It has vocals that a lot of people say sound like the Ink Spots, or like a 1940s or early 50s kind of group. And then it comes into this tragic sort of monologue thing. And then we have the weirdest part, probably the weirdest thing in the entire Gary Lewis discography. Probably the weirdest thing, he sings like his father. Time stands still. And does this almost kind of opera-like vocal imitating his father and singing these really dramatic lyrics about time standing still and relationships drifting away and things like that. It's so weird. I don't really know what to even say about it, to be honest, because it's such a strange song, and as it's sort of part spoken word, part singing, and I don't know. It feels really weird. I can see why the B-side single didn't chart, not just because Liberty didn't push B-sides, but like this isn't something you would put on for someone else, I don't think. It's such a strange thing. It does appear on a lot of their hits packages and whatnot, so I guess we have that to look forward to, but it's such an odd song. Again, I guess it kind of fits with the whole kind of clownish vibe, but at the end of the day, I think it's absolutely skippable. And I think it's this weird parody experiment that just doesn't quite work. Gary Lewis did co-write the song as well, no doubt with his dad in mind. And we end, of course, with the Johnny Burnett cover. We have Dreamin. Dreamin had been very successful for Johnny Burnett. He would pass away much, much too young. So this time, Gary Lewis and the Playboys kind of amped it up and made it a little bit more of a rocker. It's a really fun cover, and honestly a really fun closer as well. They do enough with it that it doesn't feel like a very generic, copycat filler kind of cover. And it's a nice closer, I think, to the whole album. And Dreamin' is a classic. I'm sure we've all heard it before. So, we have plenty more Gary Lewis albums to come, but we'll stop there today as we talked about their final entry for 1965, Everybody Loves a Clown. This one was released as CD, along with the subject of our next video, a little album called She's Just My Style, which I am very much looking forward to talking about because the title song is one of my two favorite Gary Lewis songs. Here's the double CD. You might remember that some of the Gary Lewis albums took a page from the Beach Boys and got 2 albums on 1 disc plus bonus tracks, and that was the case for this one. So, till next time, my friends, go out and be a clown, because remember, everybody loves a clown.